Good morning. How are you doing? Good. I'm glad he's here. It's so good to be with you again this morning. Like Tim said, today is not our last Sunday, but this will be my last, moment to address everybody all at once. And so I want to say to you, thank you. Thank you for the time that we have shared. I guess we put it all together, we've been here for about 4 months, been in Broken Arrow for 4 months. In our imagination, it was going to be much longer than that, but travel and visits and everything made it shorter. But it has been such a blessing. Thank you for those of you who have loved on our family, on Justice in particular. For those of you who helped out in so many ways, thank you. We will miss you. We already do miss you, actually. And Lord willing, we'll be back around the new year. I'm not sure if it'll be December or in January, but that's only 6 months away. So that's better than normal. And I hope that our new position with the school will allow us to be here more frequently. Please do, if you have a chance, come to our go away party tonight. We'd love to give you a hug and just thank you personally for the time that we've spent. A few weeks ago, Katie was out having some time to herself, which she tries to do once a week, and I took Justice to get a haircut. It went fine. On the way home, we're headed east down 71st, coming up on Aspen. The light was green, but it was one of those awkward times where it's green for a long time. You're not sure, should I slow down, should I keep the pace, it's going to change. So I kept the speed limit, and right as we were coming into the intersection, there was a car waiting to yield the left turn on the other side, and at the very last second, decided to try and yield real quick right in front of us. It was scary, but it wasn't super close. We had time to slow down, but it was a slam on the brakes kind of thing. So it was not a near miss, but it sure was very uncomfortable. So I honked to let this driver know that was absolutely bad form. Saw as this lady in the driver's seat just turned, didn't even acknowledge me, and drove on. That was it. Stuff like that happens from time to time. Thank goodness it wasn't a wreck. Justice asked what happened. I told him somebody wasn't paying attention. But in that moment, let me tell you who that person was. Careless, dangerous, unapologetic. I didn't even get a look. I didn't even get there was nothing. Not a nice person. Those are the facts. The moment. About an hour later, we were at home. Katie finally came home, and she was kind of depressed. And she was feeling sad about leaving Broken Arrow. She was feeling like an inadequate mother based on a look she gave Justice that morning or something. And my heart went out to her. I felt sad for her in that moment. And then she said, plus I nearly got myself in an accident. And she said, which made me start thinking how awful it would be if I had gotten in an accident and died and left you and Justice here alone. And she said, I was on 71st waiting to turn left on Aspen. She said, I had everything on my mind, was feeling distracted, decided at the last minute to go for it, thinking I could do it, but I'm used to driving the little car, which has a lot more power, and I was driving that van, and it didn't get up and go like I thought it did. And I realized, it was you. It was you. And I'm not used to seeing her drive a van. It didn't click as she just went by. And all of a sudden, she was not a careless, dangerous, unapologetic driver. I hurt for her. Knowing the facts, all of a sudden, I felt bad for her. I was sorry that she was having such a sad day. And all of a sudden, that crazy driver from an hour before wasn't so crazy after all. I know the feeling of driving when you're feeling down. I know the feeling of thinking you have plenty of time and then something happens and you didn't have plenty of time, especially in a different car. Katie's a great driver. Katie is a safe driver. It was just one of those moments. So once I was able to see that bigger picture, I was able to empathize with her. My heart hurt for her, and she wasn't my enemy anymore. Perspective. Perspective changes everything. We have one perspective, and then someone comes along and gives us some more details, and we have a whole new outlook on the situation. Last week, we read through the story of Jesus healing the blind man. Jesus declared himself to be the light of the world, and then he gave us an illustration of what that looked like, about what that meant, and said that he alone is the light that we need, and if we deny that from him, we will remain in our blindness. Today we're going to look in John 11. John 11 is, spoiler alert, the death and resurrection of Lazarus. This is the seventh miracle in John's gospel. And remember, we talked about how these were written down to make us believe that he's the Son of God and so that we could have life. Jesus is going to declare himself as something even more incredible than illustrate that. It's a story that teaches us the power, it teaches us the authority of Jesus, but it also shows us the humanity of Jesus. And it's a story which challenges us to have a greater perspective like Jesus has. On the ground, it's harder to keep the big picture in perspective, but Jesus reminds us, shows us the view from above. So last week we were in John 9, today we're in John 11. In John 10, Jesus is teaching, he's making people mad, kind of just, his daily job of declaring himself to be big things, and the religious leaders, professionals of the day, didn't like to hear that. He actually says he and God are one. They didn't like that. They called him a blasphemer. They picked up stones to kill him. They tried to arrest him. They get out of town. Jesus and the disciples get out of town to let things die down. And that's where John 11 begins. So let's go ahead and read 1 through 6. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, This illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of Man may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. What happened? Lazarus, someone he loved very much, and this family he loved very much, he's dying. So these sisters sent Jesus a message, said, please come quick, please heal him quick. They knew Jesus could heal. Jesus did it all the time, from near and from far. So they asked him to come soon. It says in verse 6, Jesus loved them, so he waited 2 days. Kind of seems like the opposite thing you would do if you knew somebody was on their deathbed. What's the deal? What's the deal with Jesus? Perspective. Perspective. What does he say? This, like the last story we read, is going to glorify God. This is an opportunity for God to work, to be glorified. And then in verse 4, he said that the sickness doesn't lead to death. It's just another opportunity for God. But why those 2 days? Why do you wait 2 days? Probably not important. Let's keep going. 7 through 10. So Jesus again said to them, truly, truly, where am I? I'm chapter 10. Then after this, he said to his disciples, let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews who were just now seeking to stone you, and you are going to go there again? Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours in the day? If anybody walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of the world. But if anybody walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. 2 days later, he says, okay, everybody, going back to Judea, going back to Lazarus. And they say, no, we just came from there. People were just trying to kill you. Why in the world would we do that? And in short, Jesus' answer is kind of, journeys are always possible. If you go at the right time, you do the right time, things are going to be okay. they still seem to be a little worried, so Jesus tells them this is what's going to happen. 11 through 15. After saying these things, he said to them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him." The disciples said to him, "Lord, if he's fallen asleep, he'll recover." Now Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought that he meant taking rest in sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, "Lazarus has died. For your sake, I'm glad that I was not there, so that you may believe, but let us go to him." Jesus says Lazarus is asleep. They're thinking literally, he's sick, he's asleep, things are going to be okay. Their perspective. Jesus is glad he wasn't there. Why? His perspective. Jesus is glad, I'm glad I wasn't there to heal him, to fix this. Why? So that you can believe. Again, the reason why John wrote this down. Interesting point. Doing it this way is going to grow his disciples' faith. It's going to make them believe. And there's a painful aspect to this perspective, that the pain of this family, the pain of his personal friends, of his disciples' confusion, all of that's not as important as their faith. And that's an uncomfortable perspective. That's an uncomfortable truth. So, Jesus explains everything in detail, and then in verse 16, Thomas, called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us go, that we may die with him." Thomas still doesn't understand. He's going to understand soon. Verse 17. Now when Jesus came, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. This is an interesting moment here in the text. He's been in the tomb 4 days. Jesus, if he is where we think he was, where it says that he was probably a day's journey away from Bethany. That means that Lazarus would have died the day that the messenger went to tell Jesus, "Come soon, Lazarus is dying." Because it would have taken a day to get there. Jesus waited 2 days, a day to get back. Now he's been dead 4 days. That means if Jesus had gone immediately, Lazarus still would have been dead. Why did he wait 2 days? Probably not important. Let's move on. 18. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, but Mary remained seated in the house. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you." So he shows up. Martha comes out. Who's there with the family? It says mourners from Jerusalem. Probably friends and family. Maybe those professional mourners that we read about around this time in history. But she goes out to see Jesus. She's by herself, and she says, "If you had been here, this wouldn't have happened." And then she says, "But," which is a really interesting moment too. God will give you whatever you ask, even now. What does that mean? Not resurrection. She's not thinking about resurrection. We'll see that in the very next verse, and then we'll see that later in her response to what Jesus does. She's not thinking about Lazarus coming back from the dead. That wasn't a normal thing. Jesus didn't do that all the time. Maybe she's just trying to be strong, maybe trusting that Jesus is going to bring some kind of comfort and hope anyway. But she's not thinking resurrection. Look, verse 23 and 24. Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Okay? Jesus is suggesting resurrection. Her response. Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." What does that mean? Jesus tells her plainly. He said, she said, "If you were here, this wouldn't have happened, but I know God will give you whatever you want." He said, "He'll rise again." She said, "Well, I know one day he will. I know on the last day he will." She believed in resurrection. She was Jewish, and then, of course, close to Jesus. She knew that there was that one day when we would all rise from the dead. But she's not thinking what Jesus is hinting at this point. It's not even really a hint. Whatever she's saying to him in 22 wasn't, "I know you can raise him from the dead today." She's not thinking that today. 25 through 27. Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. and everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord. I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world." Jesus can tell she's not hearing what he's saying, so he clarifies and says something incredible. "I am the resurrection and the life." She says, "I know he'll raise on that last day." Jesus says, that last day, that's me. That's going to happen and God's going to do amazing things. That's me. I'm doing that, and I'm standing in front of you. Do you believe that I'm that guy? That's huge. Jesus isn't just saying he's the light of the world. He's saying he's life itself. He's the antidote for death. And she says, "Yes, I believe," which is a huge thing for this Jewish woman to say that about this guy standing in front of her. That was a huge deal. But she still doesn't seem to have any hint of anything Jesus-y going on quite yet. 28 through 32. When she had said this, she went and called her sister Mary, saying in private, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." And when she heard it, she rose quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who were with her in the house consoling her saw Mary rise quickly and go out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there. Now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Mary's in the house, the mourners are around. Martha comes up, says, "Jesus is here." She gets up quickly and goes. Everybody thinks she's going to the tomb, so they go with her. And she falls down at Jesus' feet, says the exact same thing. "If you had been here." I don't know if this is an accusation. It's just, if only you had been here kind of thing. Their one chance for any hope was 4 days late. 33 through 35. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. And he said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." And Jesus wept. How does Jesus feel when he sees Mary's sadness? He hurts. It hurts to see your friends hurt. And I think this is a really important moment. What does this teach us about Jesus? It teaches us he's not separate from us in emotions. He feels our pain. He feels our experiences. His tears, they show that he hurts. Jesus was not all logic and no emotion. He was not a Vulcan. Even though he knew what was about to happen, even though he knew what he was about to do, his heart hurt over it. That should comfort us to know that Jesus isn't just someone who has the ability to fix it, but that he hurts alongside of us when those bad things are happening. And I actually believe he was angry at the situation, angry at death. What's interesting, this word that says he was deeply moved, in most modern translations say deeply moved, that word is actually indignant, like he was angry about it. The NLT says he had a deep anger well up inside of him. And it's kind of a weird thing that it says, and then Jesus was angry. What was he angry about? I think he was angry about the whole situation, angry about death, angry about the sadness. So Jesus wept like a real man. 36 to 37. So the Jews said, "Oh, see how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have also kept this man from dying?" The visitors there from Jerusalem, they see him crying. They understand that he had love towards this man, but they're confused. Isn't this the guy that just healed the blind man? Couldn't he have kept this man from dying? If he can heal somebody from being blind, surely he can keep him from dying. They're a little confused. And what's interesting here is they've all heard about it. The story's gotten out. They're doubting, or maybe doubting, kind of putting together the limits of how powerful this Jesus guy is. Some trials he can deal with, some sicknesses he can cure, but others he can't, I guess, because look it, nothing's happening. Again, it's perspective. Why was Jesus okay with the confusion of his disciples? Why is he okay with the pain of his friends and therefore his own pain? Why is he okay with the doubt of this crowd in this moment? Because he has the bigger picture in mind. And that bigger picture is faith. What's about to happen is going to grow their faith, and that's what's more important. 38 and 39. Then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he has been dead for 4 days." Now it's getting weird. Jesus has shown up. Obviously, he's going to visit the tomb of his friend who left, who died, who's asleep. And he says, "Open the tomb." And Martha, here's the other verse of why I think she didn't have any idea what was happening, said, "We don't want to do that. He's already been dead 4 days." There's that number again. 4 days. Jesus waited 2. What's the thing? Let's talk about those 4 days. Not long after New Testament times, we have record of Jewish thought, Jewish opinion, that the spirit of the departed was thought to hover around for a few days, kind of like in anticipation of maybe something would happen, they'd come back from the dead. And if you think kind of in terms of how people could go into comas and things like that, and you weren't sure, but then all of a sudden they came back, you can kind of piece together why this might make sense. But day 4 was considered when the body started to break down and it was obvious this person's not coming back. There was this idea of being mostly dead and all dead. And the Jewish people had this kind of belief that after a few days, okay, now on the 4th day, he's dead, it's for real, he's officially gone, nothing's coming back. Now, we don't know if specifically Mary and Martha believed this, but we do know it was a part of the culture not long after that time. So I think whatever the underlying beliefs happen here, Jesus seems to have wanted Lazarus to be all dead. He wanted everyone to know he's not just in a coma, he didn't just kind of die, he's not on his deathbed and he's going to come back to consciousness. Jesus wanted him really dead. 4 days dead, because culturally they said, that's it. Like, his body's starting to fall apart, and that's exactly what Martha says here. It's been 4 days, don't open that. It's going to be gross. And so, he tells her, verse 40, Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" What do you think she was thinking at that moment? After this whole scenario of not knowing what was going to happen and not believing necessarily that Jesus was going to do anything special, Jesus says, "Take away the stone." She's like, "Don't do that." And he said, "What did I tell you?" And I think right at that moment, that was when kind of this little seed of hope was like, oh my goodness, he's going to do something amazing here. Getting excited, but don't get too excited. Maybe it's not going to be what you think, but it starts to build. That hope starts to build. How would you be feeling when you think, I don't know, 41 through 42. "So they took away the stone, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, 'Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I know that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me.'" After they open the tomb, Jesus publicly prays. And what's he teaching with this prayer? God, you always hear me. What's he teaching here? The connection, the special relationship Jesus has with God. And he says, this is happening so that they will believe. I'm praying out loud right now so that they will know. And then 43 and 44. "When he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, 'Lazarus, come out.' The man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips and his face wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, 'Unbind him and let him go.'" He tells a very dead body to come out of the tomb. A body that was decomposing, that was gone, to get up and come out. And verse 44 says, the man who had died came out. Amazing. And scary, maybe. What would it have been like to be in that crowd? What would it have been like to be Mary or Martha here? Would it have been at all similar to Peter's response when the great catch came in and he fell at Jesus' feet and said, "Get away from me, I'm a sinner"? Would it have been like the blind man who was just so joyful that he just worships Jesus? But he brought a dead man back to life. What John's telling us here in the seventh miracle that he's sharing, that Jesus didn't just turn water into wine or feed 5,000 people, party trick. He didn't just heal the sick. Coincidence. They would have gotten better anyway. He didn't just heal people with physical disabilities. Fake. I know that guy. He could actually walk. He didn't just walk on water. Photoshop. He raised a dead man, a very dead man, back to life. So what does that mean? It means that if he says he's the Son of God, he's the Son of God. If he says he's the resurrection and life, well, he just proved it. That's what he is. If he has power over death, that's what he is. So what do we take from this? When times are at their toughest, we should remember that Jesus cares so much, but his perspective is very different. He sees the whole picture. Where were you when my loved one died? Where were you when my marriage fell apart? Where were you when my parents got divorced? Jesus has the heart to meet us in that pain, to cry with us, and to be angry at death with its unfair choice of victims. But his perspective is bigger. And we're challenged to have that perspective that Jesus knows our happiness is less important than our holiness. And that is a hard lesson to be okay with. This is not to say that he's causing that heartache. It says here that he hates the pain. That's what we read. But Jesus' perspective was about and is about the bigger story. And this story challenges us to have the faith to see that bigger picture. It reminds us to have the hope that in the end, he is the resurrection and life. He tells that to Martha. And he says that if we believe in him, we will live even though we die. Do you believe that? Sounds kind of crazy to me. If we believe in him, we'll live even though we die. Here's the thing. Jesus doesn't just promise heaven. He's promising to fix death. He's not just saying it's going to be okay after you die. He's saying, I'm going to fix death. I'm going to undo it. That's the whole idea, the whole appeal of resurrection in the first place. We talk about our loved ones going to a better place after they die, and I don't deny that it's probably much better, but that's not the end result. The end result is that resurrection day when he undoes death. He's going to fix it. So how does that change our perspective? How should that change our perspective? How should that change our life? Because if we have hope in this life only, Paul says, we're to be pitied among all men. Where does your hope lie? In a good place after you die? Or in the fact that there is no death? It's coming. Jesus is coming to wipe it out. After this story, many people do believe in him, but others go snitch to the Pharisees, and the decision is made that Jesus has got to be killed. Got to kill that guy who can raise people from the dead. And so one more time, Jesus will show them that he has the power over death, but this time, it's not the power over somebody else's death. It's the power over his own. And he will come back a little different. He will come back a little changed. And he is the prototype, that hope of what's waiting for us. Do you believe that Jesus is the resurrection and the life? If so, that perspective can and should change how we face the trials and troubles that we have today. But some of us may be in a time of doubt, maybe like Martha in a time of grief, able to give the right answer, but not really have the hope to back it up. At least that's what it felt like from the story. So what help do you need to change your perspective and live with a Savior who loves you, who cries with you, and who asks you to hold on to that truth that He is the resurrection and life? He is the resurrection and life. We're going to have a song right now. If you'd like to share with the elders who are going to be waiting up here to listen and to pray with you over any of this, over any of your trials, or over more discussion of whether Jesus is the resurrection and life in your life, now is a perfect time to do that. Let us stand and praise God together.